It is March 1991, and Chris Nicholson's crew lowers an underwater camera into the depths of Lake Tahoe, searching for a shipwreck the lake has kept hidden for half a century. They finally locate it, but as the camera glides past the wreck, something unexpected drifts into view, something no one on the team can identify. Seconds later, someone inside the freezing control room orders the recording to be shut off. Whatever appeared on that monitor was never released to the public, and those who witnessed it reportedly refused to talk about it ever again. This is what Nicholson's team captured beneath Lake Tahoe and why the footage ended so suddenly.
You are looking at the bottom of Lake Tahoe. How about that? Nearly 1,500 feet below the surface. And those little particles you see floating around there are rich with nutrients.
The lake that keeps everything. To understand why an experienced crew would abruptly stop recording and walk away, you first have to understand the place they were exploring. Lake Tahoe is nothing like an ordinary lake. Sitting more than 6,200 feet above sea level along the California-Nevada border, it looks almost unreal from the shore. The water is so clear it hardly seems possible, while snow-covered mountains reflect across a surface that often looks perfectly still. That is the image people know. It is the one printed on postcards and travel brochures, and it is completely accurate, at least from the surface. What most people never see is what lies below. At its deepest point, Lake Tahoe plunges more than 1,600 feet. That is deeper than stacking 4 football fields on top of one another. Imagine standing on the bottom field and looking upward while 3 more disappear into darkness above you. That is the amount of water resting over the deepest part of the lake. The farther you descend, the less it feels like a lake. Sunlight disappears first, fading away long before reaching the bottom. Then the temperature drops sharply. After that comes the silence, a complete silence so heavy that divers often describe it as something they can actually feel. Professionals who spend their lives working in deep water speak about Tahoe with unusual caution. It is not because they think it is the most dangerous lake in the world. It is because of how completely it separates you from everything familiar. There is no light, no sound, and no sense of direction beyond what your instruments tell you. Few places on Earth come closer to feeling like outer space while your feet are still on the planet. Lake Tahoe is also known as a terminal lake. Water flows into it, but very little flows back out. What ends up inside usually stays there. Right now, after several years of drought, the lake sits at its lowest level in 4 years. As the shoreline slowly pulls back, places that remained hidden for decades are beginning to appear again. Deep below the surface, the water stays only a few degrees above freezing all year long. Hardly any light reaches the basin floor, and oxygen levels are extremely low. That combination, freezing temperatures, darkness, and very little oxygen, prevents things from breaking down the way they normally would. Wood lasts, metal lasts, sometimes even cloth survives. Instead of slowly destroying what sinks into it, the lake preserves it. Objects often remain almost exactly as they were when they first slipped beneath the surface. That one characteristic turned the bottom of Lake Tahoe into an obsession for a certain group of explorers. If the lake really preserved everything so well, then perhaps one of its most famous ships was still resting down there, nearly untouched decades after everyone believed it was gone forever. The SS Tahoe, known as the Queen of the Lake. Queen of the Lake. Long before roads circled the shoreline, the SS Tahoe ruled these waters. She carried passengers and cargo across the lake at speeds considered impressive for her era. Nearly 190 feet long, she was fast, elegant, and famous throughout the region. For years, she was the main way to travel across Lake Tahoe, gliding through the deep blue water with mountains rising on both sides. people dressed nicely before stepping aboard. She represented much more than transportation. She became a symbol of the lake itself, a ship people remembered for the rest of their lives. During her best years, she offered the quickest and most comfortable trip across the water. Families planned their schedules around her departures, and life around the lake often revolved around where the SS Tahoe happened to be. But progress rarely leaves room for old favorites. Better highways arrived. Cars replaced steamships. The need for the SS Tahoe slowly disappeared, as each new road made crossing the lake by water less important. Eventually, the once proud vessel became an expensive reminder of another time. In 1940, the decision was made to sink her deliberately in deep water. The Queen of the Lake was lowered into the freezing depths on purpose, hidden from sight. That was supposed to close the story. After years of service, she would quietly disappear beneath the surface. Instead, her disappearance became the beginning of a mystery. Nobody knew exactly where the ship had settled. Once the lake swallowed her, it offered no clues. Some believed she had broken apart during the descent, leaving pieces scattered across the bottom. Others insisted she had landed upright and remained almost perfectly intact, just as the lake was rumored to preserve everything it claimed. As the years passed without anyone finding her, the line between history and legend slowly disappeared. Expeditions kept coming back. Most of them left empty-handed. Lake Tahoe does not give away its secrets easily, and its deepest waters are far beyond the reach of ordinary divers. Beyond a certain depth, scuba diving simply is not an option. Finding something there requires sonar, remotely operated vehicles, expensive equipment, and the patience to search a basin as large as a small C1 narrow strip at a time. Still, people kept trying. That is what happens when something valuable stays lost for long enough. The more tightly Tahoe held onto the ship, the more determined explorers became to find it. The Queen of the Lake slowly turned into a ghost story. A famous ship everyone knew existed, yet nobody could locate. With every unsuccessful search, her legend grew larger until she became more than just a sunken steamship. She became the prize, waiting for the one team skilled and determined enough to succeed where everyone else had failed. Before we follow Nicholson's team into the depths, take 1 second to subscribe if you enjoy real expeditions, real shipwrecks, and the stories that never seem to make it into the official record. That one click helps keep these videos coming, and it keeps you here for the parts that almost nobody speaks about, because the moment you've been waiting for begins now. March 3rd, 1991. On March 3rd, 1991, underwater explorer Chris Nicholson and his crew launched another deep-water expedition with one goal: locate the SS Tahoe and document her final resting place. The timing was carefully chosen. March brings colder conditions, and colder water holds less suspended sediment. Less sediment means better visibility. Late winter offers the clearest water Lake Tahoe has all year. If there was ever a chance to see the lake floor clearly, this was it. Anyone willing to work during that season understood the trade-off. Better visibility came with much harsher conditions. An icy wind swept across the lake, cutting through every layer of clothing the crew wore. Ice formed on equipment. Cables became stiff. Hour after hour, the team operated sonar and guided their remotely operated vehicle while working in conditions that punished both people and machines. Fingers stiffened on the controls. Every breath fogged the monitors. Their feet had long since gone numb. Working on Lake Tahoe in March means dealing with a cold that stays with you long after the day ends. Even so, no one considered stopping. Opportunities like this were rare, and the SS Tahoe had remained hidden from every expedition before them. Searching for a wreck like this requires patience above everything else. Satellite positioning systems were locked in place. The sonar was lowered into the lake. One monitor after another came to life, and the long process finally began. The boat held steady against the wind, while the sonar slowly swept across the lake bed in carefully planned passes. The operators stared at their screens, studying faint shapes and shadows. It is far less exciting than movies make it look. Most of the work is spent watching dark water, waiting for tiny hints that might mean something. You sit for hours, hoping the lake finally reveals one useful clue, while trying not to lose focus in the freezing cold. Nicholson understood that better than anyone. His career had been built on finding what other people missed by spending countless hours studying darkness until it finally revealed something worth chasing. Real deep-water exploration is not a treasure hunt. It is careful engineering mixed with endless patience. Every time the ROV descended, it consumed battery power, daylight, and precious time. On Lake Tahoe in March, it also drained body heat from everyone on board. Because of that, the crew could not investigate every signal. They had to study each sonar contact carefully and choose only the ones that seemed most promising. This team was experienced. They had searched other lakes and explored other wrecks before. They knew exactly what they were doing. That is one reason the next part of this story has stayed with so many people. Nothing about these explorers suggests they were the type to panic over nothing. The first descent revealed nothing important. A signal that looked promising would end up being nothing more than a large rock, a ridge in the sediment, or an old pile of debris with no real story behind it. The pattern repeated itself over and over. Hope, then disappointment. Hope, then disappointment. Hours passed. The daylight shifted overhead. The cold became even harder to ignore, and the SS Tahoe remained just as hidden as ever. Then, finally, the lake answered. A much stronger sonar contact appeared on the basin floor, convincing the team it deserved a closer look. The ROV descended once again, its lights cutting through water that sunlight had not reached in an incredibly long time. Foot after foot of tether disappeared into the darkness, while the operators watched their only view of the deep, a single glowing monitor inside the freezing control room. And almost immediately, something emerged from the darkness. The first wreck. There it was on the screen, a long, angular structure lying partly buried beneath the sediment. For one brief, electric moment, the crew believed their search was finally over. After all those years, all those failed attempts, and all that freezing water, they thought they were looking at the Queen of the Lake. You can picture the room. Everyone who had been tired and cold suddenly leaned toward the monitors, fully awake. But as the camera moved closer, the excitement faded. The outline wasn't right. The proportions didn't match. It wasn't the SS Tahoe. Instead, it was an uncharted towboat resting silently on the lake bed, as though it had belonged there forever. There was no record of it, no expectation of finding it. It simply appeared on the screen, almost as if the lake had decided to reveal one of its own secrets. That discovery raised a much bigger question than the one they had come to answer. If an entire towboat could disappear beneath Lake Tahoe without anyone knowing for decades, what else might be hiding down there? This wasn't some remote body of water. It was one of the country's best-known lakes, surrounded by towns, highways, and millions of visitors every year. Yet here sat a complete wreck that nobody had ever documented, discovered only because the team had been searching for another ship. The lake had hidden it all this time, and nobody had even thought to look. That's what makes deep water near civilization so unsettling. Everything above the surface has been photographed, mapped, and explored. but the bottom might as well belong to another world. Once that thought settles into your mind, it's hard to shake. From that point on, every sonar contact carries another question beneath the first. Not only what it is, but how long it has been there, and whether anyone else ever knew. The towboat had spent so many years in the darkness that people had completely forgotten it ever existed. It took an unexpected search for another vessel to bring it back into view. If Lake Tahoe could hide something that large without anyone noticing, the crew had every reason to wonder what smaller, or quieter, things might be resting nearby. Under normal circumstances, the story could have ended there. An unsuccessful search, one forgotten wreck, a note in an expedition log, and a long ride back to shore through the cold. But several hours later, another sonar contact appeared. This one was different. It was much stronger, and its measurements almost perfectly matched the SS Tahoe. The outline fit, the length matched, everything lined up. After years of unsuccessful expeditions and the disappointment of the towboat, the numbers on the screen suddenly carried real weight. The team had spent the day discovering things they weren't looking for. Now it seemed as though the lake was finally offering them the one thing they had actually come to find. The mood inside the control area changed immediately. Patience gave way to quiet excitement. The ROV was redirected toward the new target, and inside the cramped control room, conversation almost completely stopped. The ship in the dark. Every person in the room was watching the monitor. The tether slowly paid out into the black water, lowering the camera foot by foot toward whatever waited on the lake floor. Nobody rushed the process. There is no rushing a descent like that. You simply watch the machine disappear into the darkness while the depth reading continues to climb and the cold settles around you. For a long time, the monitor showed almost nothing except drifting particles, tiny white specks floating through the beam of the lights like underwater snowfall. It was only lake sediment suspended in the water, but it created an almost hypnotic view. Just darkness, falling particles, and time stretching out, while the vehicle descended farther than almost anyone will ever travel, beneath the surface, into water that had remained completely dark since long before anyone in that room was alive. Looking at the monitor, there was no real feeling of movement. There were only those slowly drifting particles, the steadily increasing depth numbers, and the growing awareness of how much water now separated the vehicle from the surface, far beyond any depth a diver could safely reach. As the camera continued its descent, the room naturally became quieter. Nobody had to tell anyone to stop talking. Everyone understood they were entering a place where the human body simply could not go. By the time the lake bed finally appeared inside the lights, it felt as though the entire room had been holding its breath. Then something enormous began appearing near the bottom of the screen. Like most large objects in deep water, it didn't appear all at once. The lights slowly revealed it section by section. First came an edge, then a curve, then the bow, the railings, and long, uninterrupted stretches of hull emerging from the darkness. It was far too large and far too deliberate to be anything natural. The structure extended beyond the edges of the camera view, and with every new section that came into sight, confidence grew. They had found the SS Tahoe. They had finally located her. According to people familiar with the expedition, the wreck was in astonishing condition. After spending more than 50 years underwater, parts of the ship reportedly looked almost untouched. Windows were still visible. Deck structures remained standing. The vessel rested upright on the lake floor as though it had been left there only yesterday, almost inviting someone to step aboard and walk the same decks its passengers once crossed. There was something deeply unsettling about it. An entire ship sat silently preserved beneath a freezing lake, illuminated only by the ROV's lights in water that had not seen daylight for half a century. Everything Lake Tahoe was known for, the cold, the darkness, and the stillness, had combined to preserve the Queen of the Lake almost exactly as she had been, frozen in time on the bottom. That was exactly why the expedition had been organized. The goal was to document the wreck by slowly recording every part of it, the hull, the decks, the railings, and create the most complete record ever made of the lake's most famous shipwreck. So the survey began. The ROV carefully moved alongside the vessel while the operators identified features one by one. For several minutes, everything unfolded exactly as it should. The work was calm, organized, and respectful. The team was finally examining a ship that had been missing for decades. At that point, there was no reason to feel anything except satisfaction. The wreck was exactly where the sonar had placed it, in far better condition than anyone had expected, and the survey was moving forward perfectly. Someone in that room was probably already imagining how history would remember this expedition. The team that finally brought the Queen of the Lake back into view after more than 50 years. That is what made what happened next so cruel. The most disturbing moment of the expedition arrived disguised as its greatest success, right in the middle of the calmest part of the entire dive. Nobody expects trouble when everything is finally going according to plan. This should have been the highlight of the mission, the story every member of the crew would tell for years afterward. Instead, it became the exact moment everything changed. As the camera drifted slightly beyond the visible side of the wreck, someone noticed something that wasn't supposed to be there. Something else down there. At first, everyone assumed it was debris. A pale object rested near the sediment, looking like just another piece of the lake floor caught inside the lights. Nicholson and the rest of the team had already seen plenty of scattered metal and broken pieces during the dive. The mind naturally prefers the simplest explanation, so debris was the first conclusion. But as the ROV moved closer, that explanation became harder to believe. The object looked too symmetrical, too smooth, and too deliberate. It didn't have the random appearance of broken wreckage or rock. It had a recognizable form, although nobody could immediately identify it. The eye kept trying to match the shape with something familiar and kept failing before trying again. Most people have experienced a smaller version of that feeling, a jacket hanging on a chair that briefly looks like a person until your brain corrects itself. But this time, the correction never happened. The longer they stared at it, the more convincing the shape became. Everything else around the wreck made sense. The hull, the railings, the sediment, the scattered debris. Only this object refused to fit. Then another shape appeared behind the first, darker than the one in front. Moments later, a third came into view beside it. Suddenly, there were three objects where seconds earlier the lake floor had appeared empty. They weren't scattered randomly like ordinary debris. They seemed positioned in relation to one another in a way that immediately felt wrong, almost arranged. The room reacted exactly as you might expect. For several seconds, nobody said aloud what everyone was beginning to suspect. Training took over first. Get a better viewing angle, improve the lighting, hold the vehicle steady. Record everything before making conclusions. That professional instinct probably kept the camera focused on the scene for as long as it did. But documenting something means continuing to look at it. And the longer they watched, the heavier the atmosphere inside the room became. People began offering explanations out loud, hoping someone else would agree. Maybe it was part of the wreck that had broken away. Maybe sediment had built up over an old fitting. Maybe the lights and suspended particles were creating an optical illusion. Every suggestion sounded believable for a few moments. Then the camera lingered a little longer. and each explanation quietly stopped making sense. The room would fall silent again. There is a particular kind of fear that comes from wanting your eyes to be wrong while slowly running out of reasonable alternatives. Eventually, nobody had another explanation to offer. One of the operators asked the pilot to hold the vehicle in place, not to move forward or turn away, simply to keep the camera fixed on whatever occupied the lower part of the screen. The silence in the room had changed. This wasn't the quiet concentration of the search anymore. It carried a much heavier feeling. Another crew member leaned closer to the monitor, studying the image before quietly saying that he believed they were looking at human remains. Then the video feed became unstable. Sediment stirred up by the ROV's thrusters drifted across the lens, turning an already cloudy image into a swirling mix of shadows and floating particles. It happened at the worst possible moment. The operators tried to maintain position while the light slowly shifted across the lake floor. Whatever entered the beam next reportedly caused the entire room to go silent. One person stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. Another said only 4 words: "Pull it back now." What makes this account so disturbing isn't the thought of bones or a clean skeleton. It's the possibility that something had been preserved. Lake Tahoe's freezing water, complete darkness, and near-constant cold dramatically slow decomposition. If anything down there had once belonged to a person, the lake would not necessarily have reduced it to bare bones the way warmer water often does. The shape could still remain. It could still resemble what it had been on the day it disappeared beneath the surface. That is what separates an unsettling story from one that truly stays with you. The crew wasn't reacting to a pile of old bones. They were reacting to something the lake itself had kept. What happened over the next few moments is rarely included when people tell this story. The official record covers the discovery of the ship, but it stops there. Everything after that comes from a very different source. This is the point where documented history and local rumor begin to separate. Almost everything people know about that split comes from a single man. He says he was aboard the expedition vessel in 1991, working just a few feet away from Chris Nicholson when everything happened. According to him, the unsettling part was not the first object that appeared on the monitor. It was what showed up after the camera shifted. He has never revealed his identity in any verifiable way, and that matters because it is the reason this remains a story rather than established fact. There is no missing tape sitting in a public archive. There is no signed testimony. There is only the account of a man who says he was there. Over the years, he has repeated the same story so many times that it has become familiar to those who have heard it. Whether you believe him is entirely up to you. So, let me leave you with one final question. If you had been sitting inside that control room in 1991, watching those shapes emerge from the darkness beneath the SS Tahoe, would you have kept recording? Or would you have done exactly what the crew reportedly did? Pull the ROV back, shut off the feed, and leave whatever was down there exactly where the lake had been keeping it all those years? Some people believe the deepest parts of Lake Tahoe contain nothing more than old wrecks and forgotten debris. Others believe the lake is still hiding things that have never been found. After hearing this story, which side do you believe? Let me know in the comments. And if stories like this stay in your mind long after they end, subscribe and stick around, because Lake Tahoe may still have more stories waiting beneath the surface.